The sound of the duffel bag hitting the floor was louder than the clink of silverware. Nolan didn't even look up when he kicked it toward the hallway. "You can sleep in the garage tonight," he said, carving into the roast his wife had overcooked. "Shelby's parents are staying in the guest room, and we need the space." I stood beside the table, still holding the glass I'd refilled for everyone but myself. My coat hung on the back of a chair they hadn't offered me to sit in. Then he laughed, light, careless, cruel. "You're just a broke old woman. Be grateful we let you stay at all." Shelby smiled, without looking at me, wiping a drip of sauce from her blouse, like this was just any Tuesday. I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I'd learned something over the years. Silence is sometimes louder than a fight. I set the glass down carefully. No sound. No drama. I walked slowly to the hallway, picked up the bag I hadn't packed, and made my way out the side door. The air was damp and heavy. The light above the garage flickered like it always had. Nolan said he'd fix it, but never did. The garage smelled like old wood motor oil and damp cardboard. I set my bag down on the cot they'd wedged beside the water heater. The blanket was thin. No pillow. I unzipped the side pocket, pulled out the old hardback novel with the fraying spine, and opened it. Taped inside the back cover was a folded page, yellowed slightly at the edges. The deed. My name. My husband's. The address. The notary stamp still legible. I smoothed the crease with 2 fingers. I didn't need to look at it tonight. I just needed to know it was still there. I placed it back inside. The book zipped the bag shut and sat on the edge of the cot, listening to the hum of the water heater, the clink of plates being washed in a kitchen I once called mine. Tomorrow, I'd begin. 8 months earlier, Nolan had taken me out to breakfast. Just the 2 of us, no Shelby, no rush. He stirred his coffee more than he drank it, then said he needed a favor. "It's just paperwork," he explained. "For the supplier. They need proof of long-term lease control for the warehouse. If it's in your name, the loan won't go through." I sipped my tea and let him talk. "You don't have to do anything, Mom. I just need your signature on a new lease. Technically, you'll still be the owner, but the lease will be in my company's name. Optics, that's all." I nodded and signed, then tucked the original deed back into my folder the moment he left the cafe. He never asked what else was in that folder. After Harold died, I'd quietly moved everything into a private trust. Not to hide it, but to protect it. Properties, titles, account permissions, all under Quinn Holdings. And I controlled every single vote. I let Nolan play the part of a man who built something. I even let him think he earned it. He gave interviews in business magazines about the family warehouse, posted photos outside the loading dock, sleeves rolled up like a man who lifted pallets. But he didn't own it. Not the warehouse. Not the storage yard. Not even the side lot he turned into employee parking without asking me. Same with the house. I bought it 15 years ago after Harold's first stroke. Paid it off in 3. Nolan never saw the closing papers. Just the welcome mat and the key I left under it. He believed what he wanted to believe. I let him. But the truth had never moved. It sat quietly inside my documents drawer. One signature away from waking up. And that morning in the garage, I realized it was time to start using my name again. I opened my bag, pulled out the folder, and reached for my pen. I was on my way to the laundry room when I heard Shelby's voice floating down the stairs, light and excited. "And this will be the nursery," she said. "We'll knock out that wall and add light oak floors." I paused beside the stairwell out of sight. She was walking her friend through the house on video, gesturing toward rooms I used to dust with my own hands. Shelby swept the camera past the bookshelf, then down the hallway toward the guest room. "We want to modernize everything. Too much old energy. It still feels like his mom lives here." I walked back to the garage without finishing the laundry. That evening, scrolling through my phone under the dim light bulb Nolan never replaced, I saw the post Shelby's design mood board. Soft pastels, modern minimalism, big text, modernizing the clutter. In the corner of the photo, barely visible, was my handmade quilt, the one I gave them when they moved in. The kitchen had a new lock code now. For the baby's safety, Nolan had explained, even though the baby hadn't arrived yet. I hadn't been given the code. Shelby's parents arrived later that night, and the table was set with porcelain plates I'd bought back in 1982. A wedding gift to myself after Harold's layoff. I heard laughter from the dining room, wine being poured. My seat left empty. A few minutes later, Nolan opened the garage door halfway and held out a plate. "Mom, there's some leftovers if you're hungry." Shelby's mom doesn't do red meat, so we had to improvise. He left it on a folding table next to the toolbox and shut the door again. I sat on the cot, eating quietly with the door cracked just enough to hear the clinking glasses. Upstairs, I had been erased, just not completely. Not yet. I reached for my notebook and began a list. Trust document. Copies, title, search, confirmation, real estate contact. Nolan caught me in the hallway the next morning, blocking my path as if I were a tenant behind on rent. He held a white envelope in his hand, crisp and too formal for anything good. "Mom, we need to talk," he said. He guided me toward the dining table, my old table, the one I refinished after Harold's surgery, and placed the envelope in front of me like a bill I'd forgotten to pay. "It's nothing serious," he added quickly. "Just something to formalize things." I slid a finger under the seal and pulled out several typed pages. Letterhead, legal phrasing, lines for signatures. Transition agreement. The wording was neat and polite, but the meaning cut straight through. I would relinquish all future claim to the residence in exchange for staying in the small room above the detached garage. A space barely big enough for a bed and a lamp. A space I had once used for storing holiday decorations. Nolan cleared his throat, as if he sensed the silence stretching too long. "Shelby's uncle drafted it for us," he explained. "Just so everything is clean, you know. No confusion down the road." No confusion, that was the phrase he used. As if I were the one confused about where I belonged. He pointed to the signature line. "Once this is signed, we can move forward with renovations. It'll give everyone clarity. Everyone but me." I folded the papers, slowly smoothing the edges, giving myself a moment to keep my voice steady. "Thank you, Nolan," I said. "I'll look it over." Relief washed over his face. He thought that was agreement. That was the part that stung the most, not the arrogance, but how natural it felt for him to believe I would simply comply. I carried the envelope back to the garage, closed the door behind me, and sat on the cot. The papers felt heavy in my lap, heavier than any deed I'd ever held. I opened my suitcase, pulled out the worn folder I had labeled months ago, and slid the new documents inside right behind the copies of my trust papers. The tab on the folder read, "Eviction Strategy." The office was cool and quiet, tucked between a title company and a tailor's shop. I had called ahead, scheduled an appointment under my full name, and arrived early. The broker was young, too young to remember what warehouses used to be before they were co-working spaces and cold storage for tech inventory. But she was sharp, professional. She didn't blink when I handed over the folder. "Original deed trust documentation and recent property tax receipts," I said, laying each paper on the glass table. "I'm ready to sell." She raised an eyebrow. "Any existing tenants?" "Yes," I replied. 30-day lease rollover, no binding long-term contract. Notify them immediately of ownership transition and new terms. Double the current rent effective next cycle. She hesitated just for a breath. "Are you sure about the increase? That's substantial." "I'm very sure," I said. She nodded and began scanning the documents one page at a time, then slid over the sale agreement. I signed without pause. By the time I left the building, she had already emailed the official notice to Nolan's company account. The walk back to the bus stop felt lighter, not because of victory, not revenge, just the weight of being seen again, not as someone's burden, but as someone who still held power. That night, Shelby posted a new story on her feed. The camera panned across their polished kitchen, catching glimpses of the wine glasses I'd boxed up and forgotten. "Big client dinner next week in our home," she chirped. So excited to finally host. I watched the video from the garage legs tucked beneath me, the same as always. But this time, I knew something they didn't. The house wasn't theirs. The warehouse wasn't theirs. And the keys they had never held them. I closed the app and pulled out a small notepad. At the top of the page, I wrote one line in ink: call residential broker. The driveway was full, 3 SUVs, 1 compact car, and a catering van that hadn't been there that morning. Through the windows, I could see warm lights, people holding wine glasses, napkins folded neatly like they'd planned this for weeks. I brushed off my jacket, smoothed the front, and opened the front door without knocking. Conversations halted the moment I stepped inside. Nolan turned from the kitchen, half a glass of red in his hand. "We're in the middle of something, Mom," he said, his voice tight. I smiled gently. "I just need a moment. This will only take one signature." From behind me, the broker stepped through the threshold, portfolio in hand. She didn't hesitate. Professional, poised as if this were just another business call. I walked past the long dining table. Shelby's parents were seated on one side, a client couple on the other. Shelby stood by the wine cart, blinking as if trying to remember whether she had invited me. I placed the manila folder on the end of the table and opened it calmly. "This is the residential deed transfer," I said, turning to the broker, "signed and notarized, effective immediately." Shelby's voice cracked. "Wait, what is this?" The broker didn't flinch. "Transfer of title. The property just sold." No one moved. Even the baby asleep in the bassinet in the corner seemed to sense the shift. Nolan set his glass down too hard. It wobbled. "You can't sell it," he said. "This is our house." "No," I replied, still smiling. "It was mine, and it's been sold." I closed the folder, nodded politely to the guests, and turned toward the door. Behind me, I heard Shelby whisper sharply, "Is this a joke?" But it wasn't. I stepped outside, let the cool air touch my face, and waited as the broker caught up beside me. She handed me a copy of the sale documents. "The funds will clear by Thursday," she said. I nodded and opened my phone. Now it was time to deal with the warehouse. I woke early the next morning, long before the sun pulled itself over the ridge. The garage was cold but quiet, and that quiet felt sharper than anything Shelby or Nolan had thrown at me. I made a cup of instant coffee, sat on the edge of the cot, and waited. It didn't take long. At 8:12 a.m., my phone buzzed once, then again, then 3 more times, short, frantic bursts. I didn't answer. I knew exactly where Nolan was standing and exactly what he was staring at. The broker had copied me on the notice, a printed sheet taped to the door of his office. Bold letters across the top. New ownership. New terms. Rent doubled. Utilities no longer included. 30 days to comply or vacate. A second sheet listed inquiries. 3 companies expressing interest, one already scheduling a walkthrough. At 8:19 a.m., he finally called. "Mom," he said, breathless. "What is this?" "The landlord says everything changed overnight." "The rent? What are you doing?" I kept my voice even, accepting an offer. The warehouse was valuable. "You're ruining me," he said louder. "I can't afford these rates." "You know that. Why would you do this to me?" I held the phone closer, not to hear him better, but to steady my hand. "I was silent when you mocked me," I said. "Silent when you moved me to the garage. Silent when you planned renovations for rooms I paid for." "That's not the same," he snapped. "No," I replied. "This is simpler. This is just math." On the other end, I heard the metallic click of his office door closing, muffling the noise of his employees. He lowered his voice. "You sold it. Without telling me. It was never yours to lose, I said. He didn't respond. Maybe he couldn't. I let the silence stretch, then added, You have 30 days. Use them wisely. When I ended the call, I set the phone beside me and smoothed the folded contract on my lap. There was still one more decision to make, and it was waiting for me just beyond the driveway. By the time the afternoon light slanted across the driveway, the locksmith had already finished. The click of the new deadbolt was soft, almost polite, but I felt it all the way through my ribs. He handed me the small envelope with the replacement keys, and I thanked him before slipping them into my coat pocket. I didn't keep them long. The real estate agent arrived minutes later, heels sharp on the pavement clipboard in hand. She moved through the house with efficient steps, checking windows, noting the condition of the stairs, glancing once at the catering dishes still sitting in the sink from the night before. When she rejoined me at the front porch, she spoke in her usual even tone. Everything is secured. The new owner has requested privacy until closing. I've posted notices on every entrance. Behind the agent's shoulder, I could see Shelby through an upstairs window phone pressed to her ear. Even from a distance, I recognized the blotchy redness around her eyes. She was crying loud, desperate, into the receiver. Calling her parents, most likely. I could imagine the words. She changed the locks. She sold the house. She didn't warn us. The agent gave me a small folder with final instructions and walked back to her car. I stood a moment longer, hearing nothing but the wind brushing the hedges. I didn't feel triumphant, just done. I walked to the side yard where my car sat packed the night before. A single suitcase, a shoebox of documents, and the leather-bound photo albums I'd always kept wrapped in a towel. The rest could stay. Furniture could be replaced. Memories couldn't. I drove south for hours. The farther I went, the more the air shifted warmer, lighter. By evening, I arrived at a long-stay rental near the coast. A small one-bedroom with plain walls and a view of the water between two weathered cottages. Quiet. Simple. Mine. I set the albums on the kitchen counter and opened the blinds. The tide was low, the sand curving like an unfinished sentence. And there in that hush, I began to think of what my next letter needed to say. A week passed before my name appeared in the small metal mailbox outside the rental. No return address, just my name written in Nolan's familiar slanted handwriting. I stood on the porch for a long moment before opening it, the sound of the ocean brushing against the sand behind me. Inside was a folded sheet of printer paper, creased unevenly, as if he'd rewritten it several times before giving up. Mom, it began, I didn't know. He wrote about the house, the trust, the warehouse. He said he never imagined any of it belonged to me in the way the documents now proved. He apologized for assuming I had nothing, for believing I was just getting by, for never asking where anything came from or how it was kept afloat. He wrote that Shelby's parents had pushed them to think long-term, that her uncle insisted it was best to transfer everything early to avoid complications later. He said they were overwhelmed, embarrassed, and certain I would simply fade into the background like a piece of furniture that no longer matched the decor. I thought you'd always be there, he wrote. I thought you didn't want anything. I don't know what I thought. I'm sorry. There were smudges near the bottom, maybe from his thumb or maybe from something else. He said they were packing. He said they didn't know where they would go. He said he wished he could take back the things he'd said in the kitchen, the hallway, the garage. He asked if I could forgive him, if we could talk, if we could start over. I read the letter twice, then sat at the small kitchen table facing the water and pulled a blank card from the drawer. I wrote one sentence. It takes more than a sorry to build a home. I sealed the envelope, walked it to the drop box near the pier, and let it fall inside with a soft metallic echo. As I walked back toward the rental, the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of salt and something new, something unfinished. I knew another letter would come. The check cleared on a Monday morning. I watched the balance update from the small desk near the window, then logged out without ceremony. No champagne, no announcement. By Wednesday, a portion of it was gone, wired directly to a foundation that funds transitional housing for older women left behind by the families they once built. I didn't put my name on the donation. I didn't need a plaque. I only asked that the money be used for fresh sheets, working heaters and locks that turned from the inside. Later that afternoon, I wrapped a scarf around my neck and stepped outside. The wind was sharp, but not cruel. I made my way down to the beach, the sand cold beneath my shoes, then cooler still when I slipped them off and let the water run over my feet. Waves pulled in and out, steady, unbothered. Farther up the shoreline, a woman in a faded red coat bent down to collect a shell. She noticed me, smiled, and raised a hand in greeting. I returned the wave unexpected warmth in my chest. I didn't know her name. She didn't know mine. But the gesture was enough. I kept walking. There was no plan, no list, no structure to hold up but my own 2 legs. For the first time in years, no one was waiting for dinner, asking for wiring transfers or whispering about where to put me. There was no upstairs I couldn't go to, no seat I hadn't earned. Everything I had kept, every document, every key, every folded page had served its purpose. And now all I carried was mine. I pressed the scarf tighter around my neck and walked toward the point where the sand curved out of view. My feet left soft prints behind me, but the tide would take them soon enough. Up ahead, the beach stretched open, quiet, wide, untouched. And I walked forward into it, not away from anything but toward something I didn't owe to anyone but myself.